Okay, considering the circumstances, she turned away from the blank screen looking distressed. She was locked in a box. That's insane. She was locked in a box. Who knows for how long? Days? Months? She must have been fed, given water, or she had starved, but she has no memory of it. She just remembers drifting in and out of sleep. She seems healthy. I don't know what to say. Impulsively, John hugged her and she sighed, hugging him back tightly. She released him abruptly, looking away as she brushed at her eyes. John pretended not to see. Can I go sit with her for a minute? He said when she straightened. I won't bother her. I just want to sit with her and know she's there. Marla nodded, her eyes brightening with tears again. Don't wake her up. She admitted as he went to the door. He nodded and slipped inside, closing the door behind him. Carlton pulled into the lot outside Jessica's apartment building, glancing around for her car. It didn't seem to be there. Guess I'll be breaking and entering. Sorry, Jess, he said cheerfully as he pulled into his spot. But a sense of joy had already set in. He wanted company, even in this small errand. That set of skeletons Jessica was hiding in her closet. He drummed his hands on the steering wheel, tapping down his nerves, and got out of the car. Jessica lived on the third floor. Carlton had only been to her place once, but he found it again easily in front of her door as a welcome mat. It was dark green, the word welcome written out in a black script. Carlton lifted the mat, but there was nothing underneath it. For a moment he stared, at a loss for what to do next. Then he flipped the mat all the way over. Tapped to the center was a key. Thought you could outsmart me, he murmured, peeling off the clear tape. Can I help you? Someone asked sternly from behind him. Carlton froze. The voice said nothing else, and so with deliberate movements he finished removing the key, set the mat back onto the ground, and smoothed back into place, trying to seem unconcerned. He put a pleasant expression on his face, stood and turned to face an elderly man scowling at him from across the hall. He was wearing a faded button-up shirt and holding a hefty book, his fingers marking his place. Do I know you? The man demanded. Carlton forced a grin and waved the key in the air. Just visiting, he said. I'm a friend of Jessica's. The old man peered at him suspiciously. She makes too much noise, he said, and shut his door. Carlton heard three locks snap in place, then silence. He waited a moment, then turned and hurriedly entered Jessica's apartment. He shut the door carefully behind him and glanced around. The apartment was no bigger or nicer than John's, although it was definitely cleaner. Most of the furniture had probably came with the place, but Jessica had determinedly made it her own. The scuffed floor was as spotless as it could be, made without an industrial sander, and Colton looked guilty down at his sneakers, thinking maybe he should have taken them off outside. Jessica had covered the worn out couch in fluffy blankets and throw pillows. Her textbooks were lined up neatly in a wide bookshelf made out of brightly painted wood planks, and above the shelf was a large corkboard full of paragraphs, cards, and ticket stubs. Carlton made his way over to it, curious. Let's see what Jessica's been up to, he said, talking to himself just to fill the silence. The corkboard was full of smiling pictures of Jessica with her friends, a graduation photo with her friends, ticket stubs from concerts and movies, two birthday cards, and a few postcards with enthusiastically and illegibly scribbled notes. Carlton set a low whistle. Somebody's popular, he muttered. Then something else caught his eye, a child's drawing, pinned in the lower corner of the board. He bent down to look, and his throat was caught. It was a crayon drawn of five children, smiling happily as they posed with a big yellow rabbit. In the bottom left corner, the artist had signed his name, and Carlton reached up to touch it lightly. Michael, he whispered. He stared into the bright eyes of the yellow rabbit behind the children, and his mouth went dry. If only I could have warned you somehow. He swallowed and straightened up, turning his attention deliberately back to the photos. She sure gets out a lot, he remarked, opening one of the cards to distract himself. Happy 15th birthday, Jessica, Ed read, and he stepped back, feeling slightly ashamed as suddenly he understood. He glanced at the ticket stubs. They were all from shows in New York. The pictures with friends were all 5 years old. Jessica's new life here didn't give her much in of the motions. Carlton turned away from the corkboard, wishing he had not intruded. The closet, he said loudly. I had to find the closet with the stuff. There was a kitchenette and past that a hallway, presumably leading to the bedroom. He found a light switch and flipped it on, and the closet appeared. Halfway down the hall, he opened it, half expecting the contents to come tumbling down on him. But though these were Charlie's possessions, it was Jessica who had done the packing. Stacks of cardboard boxes filled the closet completely, each one labeled clearly Charlie shirts and socks, Charlie books, etc. And at the very top of the stack was a long flat box labeled Charlie Weird Experiment. Weird Experiment feels like the story of my life these days. Colton whispered. He reached for it carefully and had almost gotten it down when he knocked the corner against the box underneath it, sending Charlie miscellaneous to the ground. The box split open, spewing out computer parts and random bolts and scraps of metal fur and two unattached paws. Three plastic eyes bounced as they hit the floor, then rolled across the carpet, clanking against each other merrily. This is life or death. Someone else can clean it up, Carlton decided. He stepped carefully over the rest of the mess and carried the box into Jessica's bedroom. He sat down on her bed, careful of the pale blue spread, and dragged the spare key across the packing tape to cut it. He opened the box. Yikes, he startled. Two identical faces stood upright in the box, staring at each other with blank eyes. They were like unfinished statues. They had features, but they were not refined and seemed incapable of expression. He started to lift them out of the box, then realized that they were attached to something. With care, he managed to extract the entire structure. A large black box with knobs and buttons, and the faces on their stand wired to it. It all seemed to be intact. Carlton wired the wall socket by Jessica's bed for a moment, then grabbed the cord and plugged the whole thing in. And a wave of lights came on, red and green, flashing on and off, seemingly at random, then stabilizing, some off, some on. Silver fans started to whir. Carlton looked at the faces. They were stretching, almost mimicking a human movement. Creepy, he stared. You, me, said the first, and he jumped back disconcerted. Well, she, said the second. He stared, waiting for more, but they were apparently finished for the moment, motionless and silent. Carlton shook his head, trying to make himself focus, though all he really wanted to do was sit here and watch the two faces and see what else they might have to say, or talk to them. He went back to the box. The earpieces John had described were wrapped up in a thin layer of bubble wrap. They looked like hearing aids and small clear pieces of plastic, full of wiring with a tiny switch on each side. Carlton flipped the switch on one and put it in his ear. Instantly, the faces turned to him, tilted up like they were looking straight up at him. Can they see me? Hi, Carlton said reluctantly. Who? One asked. Carlton, he answered nervously. You. The other said. Me, said the first. You guys really love pronouns, huh? Carlton said. There was no answer from the faces. He took out the earpiece and flipped the switch off, and simultaneously the faces turned back to each other. Makes you visible, right? He thought with a shiver. He turned back to the earpieces itself, sliding his thumbnail into the thin seam that ran around the edge of the casing. It popped open easily, revealing a mess of wires and a tiny computer chip. Just switch the wires. It's that easy, he muttered to himself. There was a lamp on a nightstand beside Jessica's bed, and he turned it on, holding the earpiece under the light. He stared at it, looking for a clue as to what John had been suggesting. Angling the tiny object from side to side, at least he spotted it. A single empty round input outlined in red. And why is nothing plugged into you? Carlton said triumphantly. He sorted through the other wires until he found one that matched it. The outline green. He quickly switched the wire to the red line plug and snapped the case back together. Then switched it on and stuck it back into his ear. The faces did not move. What's wrong? Don't you want to talk to me anymore? He said loudly. There was no response. Excellent, he said. Satisfied, he took out the earpiece and put it in his pocket. Then grabbed the other one as well. He unplugged, he unplugged the experiment and was about to pack it into the box when he felt a sudden prickling between his shoulders, as if someone was standing directly behind him. He could feel almost every breath on his neck. Carlton held very still, scarcely breathing. Then he spun around, his hands raised to defend himself. The room was empty. He flicked his eyes from side to side, unconvinced that he was alone. But there was nothing there. Just pack up and get out, he said weakly, but his heart was still pounding in his chest, like he was fighting for his life. He took a deep breath and he went back to the experiment. Before he could touch it, the room dipped under him like a ship bobbing into the ocean, and he fell to his knees, clutching the bed frame to steady himself. His vision blurred. Nothing was fixed in place anymore. Everything in the room seemed like it was moving at various speeds and different directions. Carlton let go of the bed frame and sank to the floor as a piercing whine arose, quickly ascending to a pitch too high to perceive. He covered his he covered his ears, but it did nothing to erase the nausea. The room kept spinning and his stomach lurched. He groaned, holding his head and closing his eyes, but the movement continued. He clenched his teeth, grimly determined not to vomit. What is happening? Carlton? Carlton! Someone called his name sweetly, and he looked. One thing in the room was still. An enormous pair of eyes staring at him was the room and rocked sickeningly. He tried to stand, but as soon as he moved, dizziness and nausea overwhelmed him. He pressed his cheek to the cool floor, desperate for relief, but it only made the room spin faster. Carlton? The room snapped back into focus. Everything stopped moving. Carlton didn't move, afraid of setting it all off again. Carlton, are you okay? A familiar voice, and he looked up to see Charlie bent over him anxiously. Charlie, he said weakly, what are you doing here? John sent me to help. What are you doing with all this stuff? She asked. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't break anything, he said, sitting up carefully. The nausea still lingered, but it was easy as he began to trust that the room had steadied itself. He glanced at Charlie, his vision still a little fuzzy. I don't mind, it's all junk anyway, but the way you were rolling around on the floor, you must have been activated something or electrocuted yourself or one or the other. Are you okay? I think so, he said. He slumped back against the bed. Nausea? Room spinning? She asked sympathetically. Terrible, he said. She put a hand on his shoulder. Come on, we need to get out of here. She stood and held out a hand to help him up. He took it, standing gingerly. The effects of whatever it had been were almost completely gone. He looked around the room, his vision clear. What exactly are you doing? Charlie asked, and Carlton froze. Her voice was too hard to polish. He turned to her, keeping his face natural. He didn't say, John, thought you might have to. Your old experiment. I thought he wanted to surprise you with it. He said, he grinned. Surprise! Charles smiled. You know, your old experiment? Carlton's mind raced. The one with the robotic hands that could play the piano, he added. You remember? Right. How sweet of you to come and get it, she said, a filterless tone in her voice, and Carlton's blood went cold. He nodded carefully. You know me, always thinking of others, he said, glancing over Charlie's shoulder at the bedroom door behind her. It was closed. She took a step closer to him, and he stepped back instinctively. She looked surprised for a moment, then grinned, looking down and seeing the two faces in the box. He moved back again, startling when he hit the wall behind him. Carlton, if I didn't know better, I think you were afraid of me, Charlie said in a low voice, stepping so close there was almost no space between them, pinning him to the wall. She reached out toward his face and then his jaw, trying not to flinch. She ran her fingers down his neck, then traced the line of his jaw. He didn't move. his breathing shallow. Charlie brushed his hair out of his face and pressed closer to him, drawing her hand to the back of his neck. Her face was inches from his. Charlie, you're not really my type, you know, he managed to say. She smiled. You haven't even given me a chance. Are you sure? She whispered. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're okay looking, but let's be honest, you're nothing to write home about, he quipped, maintaining eye contact. I mean, those boots with that skirt? Charlie's grin started to wane. Sorry, that was rude. I'm sure you'll find a guy someday who appreciates you for who you are. He tried to inch his way toward the door. Now, if you excuse me, I'm late for a quarter practice, so let me get you by and I'll be on my way. Carlton groaned, but Charlie didn't budge. I promise, I won't tell anyone that I rejected you. Just hit the gym and we can try again in a few years. Carlton, you're obviously flustered. There's only one way to really be sure how you feel, Charlie said softly. She leaned closer and Carlton screwed his eyes shut. The earpiece, it was in his right pocket. Charlie, you're right, but maybe we should just talk for a while, you know? I rushed into my last relationship and I almost ended up dead in a moldy fursuit. Just distract her until his fingers closed on the earpiece and he pulled it from his pocket, opening his eyes at the same time. Carlton screamed. Charlie's face was splitting apart. Her skin had taken on a plastic case. It was cracked in the middle, splintering into triangular sections. As he watched, her hands tightened around his neck. The triangles lifted up and pulled back like razor-edged flower petals, revealing an entirely different face, sleek and feminine, but definitely not human. The petals of what had been Charlie's face began to move along with the round perimeter of the new face, beginning to look more like a saw blade than a flower. The animatronic girl pursed her metal lips, leaning for a kiss as the blades spun closer and closer to Carlton's face. In a final burst of self-preservation, he yanked the earpiece out of his pocket and jammed it into his ear, flipping the switch. The animatronic girl drew back at once, letting go of Carlton's neck with a surprised look on her metal face. She glanced around the room. He stared at her, frozen in terror for a moment. Then he realized what was happening. She can't see me. He waited, watching as she took deliberate steps backward, her eyes darting back and forth. She stood for a moment, the plates of her face snapping back together and formed the painted glossy face of a doll. Then suddenly a ripple of light passes over her and she appeared to be Charlie again, her face expressionless. After another minute, she turned and went to the bedroom closet. She peered in, pushing clothes out of it as if something might have been hidden behind them, then stepped away. She went to the bed and grabbed a corner, then lifted it off to the ground. She considered the empty floor for a second, then let go of the bed, dropping with a crash. Once more, she scanned the room, and at last, she opened the door to the bedroom and let herself out. Carlton tiptoed behind her, following her into the hall. She stopped short in front of the hall closet, and he almost bumped into her, barely catching himself before they collided. The animatronic girl ripped the boxes from the neatly stacked closet, tossing them haphazardly on the ground behind her. Carlton cautiously stepped back a few feet. When the girl was satisfied the closet was unoccupied, she checked the bathroom, then walked out into the living room. With one last dissatisfied glance around, the amateur girl left Jessica's apartment, closing the door calmly behind her. Carlton rushed into the window, watching as she exited the building and walked away down the road, heading toward the town. When she was out of sight, Carlton heaved a sigh, gasping as if he had been holding his breath. He felt dizzy again, lightheaded, but this time it was only fading adrenaline. He started to take the earpiece out, then thought better of it and left it in the place. He patted his left pocket, reassuring himself that the second earpiece was still there, and he hurried out of the apartment and down to his car. He drove away urgently, heading toward John's house without regard for the speed limit and hoping the animatronic girl was going the other direction. Charlie heard the door close and she turned toward it. The room was dark except for the light filtering in through the small dirty window, and she squinted to see who had just come in. John, she whispered. Yeah, he said in the same tone. Did you wake up?